The dry wind of the frontier carried the scent of dust, desperation, and something else the wandering cowboy named Colton Briggs could never quite explain, like fate trying to whisper in a man's ear. He had been riding alone for 3 days across the rugged land between Willow Bend and the Red Rock Canyons, hoping only for a quiet sunset and a fire to warm his bones. But life on these plains had a way of changing direction without warning, and that day, as he crossed a lonely stretch of road carved between tall sagebrush, he saw a figure stumbling in the heat, small, exhausted, and barefoot. When he rode closer, he realized it was a young woman covered in dust, her dress torn from running, her dark hair sticking to her face as if every strand begged for mercy. She tried to stand tall, but her trembling knees betrayed her. "Ma'am," Colton called, pulling his horse to a slow stop. She didn't answer at first, only looked up with eyes so full of fear they could pierce even a hardened heart. She whispered, "Please. I need a ride. I don't have money. I can pay with myself if I must." And she began to reach for the strap of her dress with shaking hands, as if humiliation was the only currency she had left in this unforgiving world. Colton's jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but at whatever had driven her to believe such an offer was needed. He swung from his saddle in a single smooth motion and grabbed her hands gently but firmly. "Stop," he said, his voice low, steady as the ground beneath them. "You don't owe me that. Not now. Not ever." She stared at him, almost confused by the kindness, as if she'd been wandering for so long that trust had become a foreign language. "But if you don't want that, why help me?" Colton didn't hesitate. "Because no woman should think she needs to give up her dignity just to reach safety," he said, lifting her before she could argue and settling her on his horse. "You're safe now." The moment her shaking body rested against the saddle horn, she burst into tears, quiet, shaking sobs that carved invisible scars across the plains. Colton rode slow at first, letting her breathe, letting her remember she was human. As they moved, he asked her name. "Evelyn," she whispered. "Evelyn Rhodes." She said she had escaped from a traveling camp controlled by a man named Porter Hale, a trader who lured desperate people with promises of food and work, only to trap them in debts they could never repay. Evelyn had been one of the women forced to cook and clean, forbidden to leave the tents without a guard. When she tried to flee, Porter sent 2 of his men after her. She'd been running since dawn. Colton listened silently, his hand steady on the reins, his eyes sharper than ever. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him, and he could smell it now like a storm waiting to break open the sky. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll get you someplace safe. After that, I'll deal with the men chasing you." Evelyn shook her head violently. "No. You can't. They'll kill you." Colton almost laughed, soft, but with an edge. "I've been shot at enough to know death ain't impressed by loud men with small guns." She stared at him like he was carved from a different world. Maybe he was. The ride stretched into evening, the sky burned orange, then softened into purple. Evelyn slowly began to breathe easier, but she still flinched at every sound, every distant hoofbeat, every rustle of brush. When Colton noticed her struggling to stay awake, he said, "Lean on me. You're tired." "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured. "You're not," he said. "You're just a person who needs help. That's all." The simple kindness made her eyes fill again. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone should have done it for my sister long ago," he said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. He rarely spoke of the girl he'd failed to save, taken by sickness before help could reach them. Evelyn didn't speak again for a long time after that, but something changed in the silence between them. She trusted him now, just a little. They reached Colton's modest homestead near the riverbank just as the moon rose. It was small, weathered, but safe, a place built by hands that believed in second chances. Colton helped her down, gave her food, water, and a blanket. But before she slept, she gripped his wrist. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd have to give away the last piece of myself to survive." Colton knelt beside her so she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Evelyn, listen to me. Your worth ain't measured by what a man takes from you. It's measured by what you've survived. And you've survived more than most." She cried again, but those tears were different. Softer. Hopeful. That night, as Colton sat at the window, shotgun across his lap, eyes scanning the dark horizon for approaching riders. He wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about the woman sleeping in his bedroll by the fire, and about the promise he had silently made to himself. He would protect her. Not because she offered something. Not because he expected something. But because kindness was all a man had out here if he wanted to stay human. And as the clouds rolled over the moon, Colton Briggs knew one thing with absolute certainty: Porter Hale's men would come for her. And when they did, they'd learn what kind of men had taken her in. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of a fight. And in the shadows of the plains, a storm was rising. And before dawn came, lives would change forever. So if you're still reading this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will shake the entire frontier, and you won't want to miss Chapter 2. The night settled over the plains like a blanket of quiet tension, and while Evelyn slept with her face soft for the first time in days, Colton Briggs sat guard by the window, watching the moonlight glint off the river while every instinct in him sharpened like a knife. He had lived too long on the frontier not to recognize the signs: broken branches near the North Trail, dust unsettled in places it shouldn't be, and the feeling, deep in his bones, that riders were coming, closing in with each passing hour. But he let Evelyn rest, because tomorrow would demand all the strength she had. As dawn bled into the sky, she woke to the smell of firewood and the sight of Colton brewing coffee, shotgun leaning against his leg like a loyal companion. "Did they come?" she asked, voice trembling. Colton shook his head. "Not yet. But they will." He handed her a tin cup of water, watching her sip with careful gratitude. When she apologized for taking his bedroll, he only shrugged. "A bed ain't worth much if people ain't safe enough to sleep in it." She smiled weakly, a small gesture that warmed the quiet cabin. But the moment was broken by the faint rumble of hooves rolling over the earth like an approaching storm. Evelyn's eyes widened. "It's them." Colton grabbed his hat, holstered 2 pistols, and stepped outside with the calm certainty of a man who had faced death before and learned to look it in the eye without blinking. Evelyn followed to the doorway but froze when she saw 3 riders approaching, men with cruel smirks, dust-coated coats, and the arrogance of wolves who believed the sheep couldn't fight back. The leader, a lanky brute with a scar slicing across his cheek, pulled his horse to a stop and spat in the dirt. "Morning," he drawled. "We're looking for a runaway. Pretty little thing. Name's Evelyn. Seen her?" Colton didn't flinch. "I have." The men stiffened. "Then hand her over," the scarred man demanded. "Porter Hale owns her debt. She belongs to him." Colton's voice dropped into a dangerous calm, like a river right before it floods. "No woman belongs to any man." The leader leaned forward. "That ain't your decision, cowboy." Colton stepped closer, boots steady, eyes cold. "It is today." The men exchanged looks, then reached for their guns. But Colton moved first. A single shot cracked through the morning air, deafening in its resolve. Before the leader's hand even touched his holster, Colton's bullet ripped it clean away, sending his gun spinning into the dirt. The man screamed, clutching his hand. The others scrambled, but Colton didn't aim to kill, just to stop. 2 more shots hit the ground near their boots, kicking up dirt so sharp it stung their skin like fire ants. "Pick up your friend," Colton ordered. "Tell Porter Hale that Evelyn Rhodes is under my protection. If he wants to challenge that, he can come himself." Trembling, angry, but terrified, the men dragged their wounded leader back onto his horse and rode off, the echo of defeat following behind them. When the dust settled, Evelyn fell to her knees, shaking. "Colton, they'll come back. With more men. Porter doesn't give up." Colton holstered his gun and knelt beside her. "I know. But you're not running anymore. You're not alone." She looked at him with something new, faith, fragile but growing. For the next hours, Colton prepared the homestead like a fortress, reinforcing doors, placing water by the window, stacking ammunition, checking the horses. Evelyn watched him from the fire, her fear slowly replaced by something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude. Hope. The belief that maybe, just maybe, a woman who'd been treated like property could find herself again in the presence of a man who only wanted to protect her soul. By late afternoon, a wagon approached from the ridge. Colton recognized the shape even before the men stepped down: Porter Hale himself, well-dressed, well-fed, and full of the smirking confidence of someone who thought the law bent beneath his boots. Flanked by 4 armed men, he strutted toward the cabin. "Mr. Briggs," Porter said smoothly. "You've caused me trouble this morning." Colton crossed his arms. "Your trouble ain't my concern." "It is," Porter replied. "You stole my worker." Evelyn stepped out before Colton could stop her, voice trembling but fierce. "I'm not your worker. I'm not your property." Porter chuckled darkly. "You signed a contract, Evelyn. You belonged to me for 6 months. You ran with 2 months left." Evelyn shook her head. "You lied. You said it was a kitchen job. But you locked us inside tents and..." "Enough," Porter snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "Cowboy, give her back and I'll forget this." Colton stepped forward, placing himself between them. "She's not going anywhere." Porter's smile vanished. "I wasn't asking." Then the shooting started. Gunfire ripped through the air, sending splinters flying from the cabin walls. Colton shoved Evelyn inside, yelling, "Stay low." He returned fire with deadly precision. One shot dropped a man by the wagon, another clipped the shoulder of a bandit hiding behind a barrel. Porter shouted orders, enraged, but Colton fought like a man who'd already buried too many regrets and wasn't about to add another. Evelyn scrambled to load ammunition, sliding bullets to him with shaking hands. "Colton, please don't die," she whispered. "Not for me." He gave her a quick, fierce look, breathing hard. "I ain't dying. Not today. Not while you still need saving." She felt something inside her break open and bloom, something deeper than gratitude, stronger than fear. After a brutal exchange, Porter's men began to fall back, wounded and panicked. Porter himself ducked behind the wagon, firing wildly. Colton stepped out, gun raised, voice booming with authority. "This ends now." Porter peeked up. Just long enough for Colton to shoot the gun clean from his hand. The men screamed, falling backward as his weapon skidded across the dirt. The remaining men fled, abandoning their fearless leader. Porter, shaking and bleeding, glared at Evelyn. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "You think this cowboy can protect you forever?" Evelyn stepped forward, standing tall despite the trembling in her bones. "No," she said. "But he protected me long enough for me to protect myself." And with that, she kicked Porter's fallen gun far into the brush. Colton tied Porter's hands, loaded him into the wagon, and slapped the horse, sending him rolling toward the nearest sheriff's town with a note pinned to his vest explaining every crime Porter had committed. Silence returned to the plains. Evelyn turned to Colton, tears brimming. "Why did you risk everything for me?" Colton took off his hat, his voice gentle as dusk. "Because you deserved someone who'd stand up for you. Because no woman should ever feel like she has to sell her body just to get a ride. Because you matter." She stepped closer. "Colton, you saved more than my life. You saved my dignity." He swallowed, eyes softening. "Evelyn, you did that yourself. I just gave you a horse." A soft laugh escaped her, warm, real. Then she hugged him, burying her face against his chest. He held her, steady and strong, feeling the weight of her past fall away like dust on the wind. That night, as they sat by the fire, Evelyn looked at him with a smile that changed something inside him forever. "What happens now?" she asked. Colton gazed at the horizon, then back at her. "Whatever you want," he said. "You're free." She reached for his hand, hesitant, hopeful. Maybe I don't want to leave just yet." Colton's smile was slow, warm, and full of promise. "Then stay," he said simply. And as the flames danced and the wind softened, the frontier finally felt like a place where new beginnings could grow. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because more powerful Western tales are always on the way, stories of courage, kindness, and the unexpected heroes who still ride the dusty roads of the old frontier.